because he's so omnipresent. It's the guy that actually can refer to the blogosphere as his own personal MySpace. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got Cory Doctorow up here to do our keynote this morning. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. How's my level? You guys hear me okay? A little closer. All right, I'll just kick my power out. And now I will fall off the stage. There we go. All's good. All right. Hi there. I'm Cory Doctorow, and I co-edit a website called Boing Boing, and I'm a fellow of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization that used to be my employer. And this year I'm the Canada-US Fulbright Chair at the University of Southern California, where I'm teaching an interdisciplinary group of students about DRM and the risks to it. And, you know, the funny thing is I don't have any credentials. I don't have a degree. I just kind of stuff because in 1977, when I got my first computer, I fell in love, and it's a love affair that never ended. When I held that machine in my hands, when I used it, when I used it to log on using the acoustic coupler to a PDP at a nearby university, I felt a rightness there, like a tool that had been made for my hand had come into it. And I think that that's common to the experience of so many of us. It was a machine that did my bidding. As time went by, I found myself getting into programming, and although I was never a virtuoso programmer, and just as quickly as I started working as a programmer, I stopped, I found that there was no experience quite so thrilling as taking one of these amazing tools and getting it to do my bidding, getting it to jump and to buck and to do exactly what I told it, even when what I told it to do was wrong, and when I got those crashes and saw that I was an imperfect god to be universe. And I found, even though I was never a virtuoso programmer and my career didn't end up being programmer, that everything I loved moved into the PC, and it became an unparalleled tool for self-expression. And so as the years went by, I found politics and personal relationships and art and news and everything else that mattered to me had moved onto this platform, this open platform that anyone could play with, that anyone could move into, things that the designers never envisioned were happening there. The law of unintended consequences played out and played out and played out, and every day my love affair with computers gets deeper and more profound. So we tend to forget in this era of PCs what the mainframe meant. The mainframe didn't just mean that few people had computers. It meant that nearly everyone who used a computer only got to use and see the screens and programs that some central policy authority dictated to them. Now, that's not to say that mainframes weren't important and useful. They revolutionized business and they revolutionized government. But mainframes were not something that an individual could modify, improve upon, understand, or use in the way that suited them. In fact, as the PC emerged, it became clear that the PC represented a dire threat to a mode of doing business, to the extent that people who brought their 8086s and their into work were fired, right? They had to hide those machines under the desk because it was such a fundamental threat to the security model where a few geeks in white lab coats and the people who employed them got to dictate what all the losers could see and do, that it was important that anyone who challenged that be thrown out of the organization. The same is true of the internet. Right? The same is true of the internet because it replaced special purpose networks where every connection that you could make and every call that you could run was prescribed in advance. It was a default deny stance that prevailed in the networks that predated the internet. So that if you were Tim Berners-Lee and it were 1988 and you invented a protocol and a program and a server and you just wanted it to run on port 80, in the era before the internet, in the era of the balkanized private network, you would have to go and convince every systems administrator in every wiring closet that port 80 is to be opened, that HTTP to their business model, and that nothing bad would ever come as a result of HTTP. And of course, no protocol could ever meet that standard, and in particular where you have change-averse people who frankly have better things to do with their time than listen to your crackpot.com business model ideas, it's unlikely that you'll get port 80 opened in all the wiring closets. And since these are Metcalfe's law technologies, excuse me, I did the other dumb speaker thing, I forgot to turn off my phone. Let this be a lesson to you, turn off your phone. So, that said, we replaced the special purpose network with the general purpose network. And in so doing, we changed the world from a world in which you could only see the screens that someone prescribed and only run the protocols and talk to the people that some central authority prescribed, into a world in which anyone could communicate with anyone without any third party intervening using any technology or protocol that they wanted. A profound shift. And when I think about what causes me to fall in love with the internet, it's that. It's that every day, playing out all over the world, individuals are figuring out what works best for them and making it happen, making the machine buck and hum to their will and sharing their will with the rest of us and building out bigger and better technologies. By the same token, when the crypto wars were over, it seemed like we were on the dawn of a new era. It seemed like we were entering into an era in which not only could anyone communicate with anyone, but they could do so with perfect privacy. But today, the upstarts of yesterday, the people who organize businesses around capturing the value that was lost when they fired the PC pioneers, the people who figured out what crypto was good for and created commerce out of it, the people who saw the internet as something that was a useful and valuable tool, it seems like a lot of those people are turning into the people they replaced. Like the Animal Farm, when you look from the pigs to the farmers and back to the pigs, and you can't see the difference anymore. We're finding ourselves surrounded by an IT industry that increasingly takes it as its mission to figure out how to turn our machines and our networks into special purpose tools that respond to the will of people other than their users, where central policy can be dictated and enforced against the people who use the tools. So the worst practices of the technology industry are now being exported to other industries. So in software is kind of the birthplace of this terrible Frankensteinian monster called the EULA, the End User License Agreement. It was the first time that anyone really thought that you could do this terrible violence to the legitimate and noble agreement, right? That thing that happens when you and I sit down at a table and start with what we want and walk away with what we need. When you could take that and you could violate it and turn it into something so trivial, you can form an agreement merely by looking at a sticker, or merely by having a screen of text flashed in front of you, and that agreement somehow constitutes something binding, a waiver of the rights that were set up by statute and practice and custom in the service of enhancing someone else's business model at your expense. So we're seeing EULAs move into areas beyond software now. So for example, films. If you go to Amazon and you buy a movie from Unbox, you'll find yourself agreeing to a bunch no sane human being would ever form an actual agreement to. This is an agreement in quotes. And that agreement includes things like they can delete all the movies that you bought whenever they want to. They can dictate which devices you can play the movies on from day to day, from moment to moment. You can't sell the movies, you can't loan the movies, you can't return the movies. If the movies are never delivered to you, you still have to pay for them. You can't take the movies with you if you move abroad. You can't take the movies with you if you go abroad on holiday. Those rules are embodied in a EULA that is to a greater or lesser extent binding. But it doesn't stop there. The hardware industry has decided that the EULA is a great bit of kit to stick in their own toolbox. So I just bought a Lenovo laptop, and when I opened the box, I found an 8-page acquisition agreement that described to me all the things I'd agreed to by opening the box. Right? By dint of becoming a customer, I had formed. It's coming to television. So I was recently at a digital television standards body meeting in Europe, and a representative of the Motion Picture Association of America was there, and he was describing a system that he wanted to include in broadcast television so that certain shows would only work on certain outputs from your receiver. Right? So as you change the channel, bits and pieces of your home theater would go dark. And I said, well, you want to apply this to broadcast television, and at least in the US, which is one of the places he wanted this to apply, we have statutory rights around what we can do with the television we receive. And that's because broadcasters are corporate welfare bums. They don't get that they don't pay for that spectrum, that valuable, scarce electromagnetic spectrum that we turn into so much value. Look at that tiny little slice that Part 15 gave to us, where we have our 2.4 gigahertz applications and all the value that was created out of it. The broadcasters get the exclusive right to use spectrum that's infinitely more valuable, low frequency penetrative UHF spectrum, for free, And all they're expected to do in exchange for it is broadcast. And so we have rights to those broadcasts because they're in a sense, those broadcasts unfold on our property, our spectrum, the American public spectrum. So I said, that belongs to us. How can you tell me that parts of my theater should go dark depending on which channel I'm watching, depending on which show is on? And he said, well, it's true that you do have rights, but what if you decided to waive them in consideration of seeing a show that you couldn't otherwise see? Well, you know, waiving rights in consideration for value, that makes sense. That is one of the ways that we make an agreement. For example, if you owned an apartment and you moved abroad for a year, you might rent out your condo, and in so doing, you would waive your right to just walk in and start eating the food in the fridge in exchange for the rent your tenants would pay you. And I said, well, that's an interesting thing. How would you form an agreement to waive your rights to watch a show on a certain piece of receiver equipment? It's simple. You're watching channel 3 and you press the channel up button. Now you're watching channel 4 and you agreed. You agreed when you pressed channel up. Moreover, these technologies are now embodying something called authorized domain, which has become a very sexy subject in digital rights management technology. And the idea of authorized domain is that you further agree that you will only watch the programs that you receive on one household's worth of devices. This seems like a lot more liberal than saying you can only watch your DVD on one device at once. They say you can watch it on a household's worth of devices at once. But it raises an interesting question. What's a household? Right? There are varying definitions of household that prevail in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. So while the people who propose authorized domain inevitably will trot out examples like, we can accommodate you if your household includes a minivan and a summer home, they never trotted examples like, we can accommodate family in Manila whose daughter works as a domestic in California and whose son is building buildings in Saudi Arabia. Right? That household isn't countenanced in their designs because they're not designing technology for those people. They're designing technologies for themselves. And what happens when you turn general purpose networks that anyone can adapt to suit their own needs into special purpose networks that are designed for the majority is that everyone who doesn't fit down that central mold, anyone who's a little bit true, and I think that includes most of us, is not accommodated by the plans. We all end up second-class citizens in the technology universe. It's coming to consoles. So if you buy a video game, you'll find yourself captive to a fairly corrosive business model, the razor blade business model, where you give away the handles and you sell the blades for more. In the case of things like the Xbox 360 or the PSP, what they do is they give away the hardware at slightly below cost, and then they make up the money by saying, only we can install software on this hardware, and we will sell the right to install software on your hardware. The stuff that you own, we'll sell that right to other people. It's kind of like being traded to another prisoner for a couple of packs of cigarettes, right? That's the core of that business model, and you find over and over again that these consoles are now being designed in a way that tries to prohibit you from modifying them, from understanding them, and that you agree to reverse engineer them, not to install code on them just by opening the box. We're seeing this, of course, in peripherals. Toner cartridges, another example of this razor blade business model where the toner cartridge often contains more intelligence than the printer, all of it aimed at keeping you from refilling the cartridge. Imagine if instead they decided to have a business model where they embraced figuring out how you could add value to a toner cartridge. Right? Think of all the things that people print with inkjets right now. You have people who print